A millionaire gets into his armored car, unaware that someone is hiding in the back seat. A street girl surprises him with a direct order. "Shut up and listen to me, please." What seemed like childish delirium reveals a $1 million conspiracy about to destroy him. And in that bewildering moment, the most insane turnaround of his life begins, orchestrated by a child invisible to the world. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The rain poured relentlessly over Seattle's skyline as Richard Daniels stared out from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. At 52, Richard, known as Rich to his closest associates, had built Horizon Technologies from a garage startup to a $200 million empire that rivaled some of the city's most established tech firms. The view from the 37th floor offered a panoramic vista of Elliott Bay, where cargo ships moved like toys through the misty morning. "Mr. Daniels, the board is waiting in the conference room," announced Sarah Jenkins, his executive assistant. Of 10 years, her voice carrying its usual professional timbre. Rich nodded, straightening his custom-tailored suit. "The quarterly reports look good, better than projected." "Yes, Mr. Daniels. Michael has prepared an extensive presentation on the Japanese investment opportunity. He seems quite enthusiastic about it." Michael Thompson had been Rich's business partner for 15 years, there from the early days when they had nothing but dreams and maxed-out credit cards. Their partnership had weathered market crashes, tech bubbles, and countless sleepless nights. Now Horizon stood on the precipice of international expansion, with Japanese investors expressing serious interest in a partnership that could double their market reach. "I'll be there in 5 minutes, Rich replied, turning back to the window. Something about the looming meeting left him uneasy, though he couldn't place why. Michael had been pushing hard for this deal, unusually so even for him. As Sarah's heels clicked away down the hallway, Rich gathered his thoughts. The merger. Documents would be finalized tomorrow. Everything was moving quickly, perhaps too quickly, but Michael insisted the Japanese investors wouldn't wait. "Strike while the iron is hot," he'd said repeatedly over the past weeks. The meeting stretched for 3 hours, with Michael dominating the conversation, his charismatic presence filling the room as he outlined projections that seemed almost too optimistic. When questions arose about certain contractual details, he deftly redirected the conversation. "We can iron out the specifics later," Michael assured with his trademark smile. "What matters is that we're all on board with the direction." By late afternoon, Rich's schedule had been packed with back-to-back meetings, leaving him barely enough time to review the preliminary merger documentation that Sarah had placed on his desk. The stack of papers was dauntingly thick. "Everything's in order," she assured him. "Michael and the legal team have been over it thoroughly." Rich nodded, trusting the system he'd built. "I'll review it tonight and have any questions ready for tomorrow's signing." As darkness fell over Seattle, Rich finally headed to the underground parking garage. The building had emptied hours ago, leaving only the security guard who nodded as Rich passed. The day had been exhausting, and the weight of tomorrow's decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. His silver Tesla waited in its reserved spot, a small luxury he allowed himself after years of reinvesting nearly every dollar back into the company. He pressed his key fob, hearing the familiar click of the doors unlocking. As he slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, a small sound from the back made him freeze. "Don't sign those papers tomorrow." Rich's heart nearly stopped. He whipped around, reaching for his phone, ready to call security. There, curled up on his back seat, was a little girl. No more than 7 years old, she had dirty blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days, wearing clothes that were clearly too large for her small frame. Her blue eyes, however, shone with an intensity that struck him immediately. Intelligence, beyond her years. "Who are you? How did you get in my car?" Rich demanded, his voice sharp with surprise and confusion. The girl sat up straighter, not showing any fear despite his tone. "My name is Emily. The cleaning lady left your car open when she was wiping the windows, but that's not important." She leaned forward, her expression deadly serious. "What's important is that your partner and your assistant are planning to steal your company." Rich stared at her, completely thrown off balance. A homeless child in his car claiming knowledge of corporate espionage. It was absurd. "Listen, I don't know what game you're playing, Gads." "It's not a game," Emily interrupted. "I heard them talking. The man with the expensive watch and the lady with the red-bottom shoes, they were in the big room with the glass table laughing about how you'd sign the papers without reading the fine print. They called you," she hesitated, looking uncomfortable, "a sentimental fool and an obedient puppy. They said, by this time tomorrow you'd have nothing left." Rich felt as though the temperature in the car had dropped 10 degrees. The details were too specific. Michael's obsession with luxury watches, Sarah's collection of Louboutins, the conference room's distinctive glass table. But it was impossible. This had to be some elaborate scam. "That's ridiculous. Those people are my trusted colleagues. We've worked together for years." 15 years with the man, 10 with the lady, Emily said, flatly. "I know, they talked about it, about how long they've been waiting for the right moment." Rich's mind raced. How could this child know the exact tenure of his business relationships? Was she being used by a competitor? "Who put you up to this? Is someone paying you to say these things?" Emily's face hardened with the practiced determination of someone who'd learned to survive on the streets. "Nobody put me up to anything. I've been sleeping in your building's ventilation system for 2 weeks. It's warm there, I hear things." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "I wrote down some of the codes and numbers they mentioned, something about 17 fake companies and contracts to wash money." Rich took the paper, his hand trembling slightly. Written in a child's uneven scrawl were account numbers and the names of shell companies he'd never heard of, but with a naming convention suspiciously similar to Horizon's subsidiary pattern. "This is... I need to verify this," he muttered, more to himself than to the girl. "You have until morning," Emily said with the gravity of someone 3 times her age. "After that, it'll be too late." Rich studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. Instead, he saw only earnestness and something else. Fear, not for herself, but for him. It was the most unlikely warning from the most unlikely source, yet something deep in his gut told him not to dismiss it. "How did you end up on the streets?" he asked, his tone softening as the businessman in him temporarily took a back seat to basic human concern. Emily shrugged, the gesture far too adult for her small shoulders. "My foster family decided they didn't want me anymore. I've been on my own for about a month." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Rich made a decision. "Come with me, you need a proper meal and somewhere safe to stay while I look into this." He hesitated, then added, "And if what you're saying is true, Emily, you may have just saved something I've spent my entire life building." As they drove through the rainy Seattle night, Rich couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of the situation. His entire world had been turned upside down by a 7-year-old girl who had appeared like a guardian angel in his back seat. Either this was an elaborate hoax, or he'd been blind to treachery from those closest to him. By morning, he would know which. What he couldn't possibly know was how profoundly this chance encounter would change both their lives, setting in motion events that would transform not just Horizon Technologies, but the very definition of what made a family. Rich's penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle offered a stark contrast to the world Emily had been surviving in. As he unlocked the door, the smart home system automatically adjusted the lighting and temperature. The girl stood in the entryway, her small body tense, eyes darting around the spacious, open-concept living area as though mapping escape routes. "Are you hungry?" Rich asked, setting his briefcase down. Emily nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." "Please, call me Rich," he replied, moving to the kitchen. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage pasta. How does spaghetti sound?" "I'll eat anything," she said simply, still not moving from her spot by the door. While Rich prepared the meal, Emily gradually ventured further into the apartment, examining the minimalist furniture and the wall of awards and photographs documenting Horizon's rise to prominence. She stopped at one particular photo, Rich and Michael at the company's 10th anniversary celebration, arms around each other's shoulders, champagne glasses raised in triumph. "He looks nice in pictures," she observed quietly. Rich glanced over. From the kitchen, "Michael and I have been through everything together. College roommates, failed startups, sleeping on office floors." He shook his head. What you're suggesting, it's hard to believe. Adults always believe other adults over kids, Emily said with resigned wisdom, especially when the adults wear nice clothes. The simple truth of her statement struck Rich deeply. He set 2 plates of spaghetti on the dining table. Come eat. Throughout dinner, Rich asked questions, testing Emily's claims. The details she provided were disturbingly specific. Meeting times, access codes, fragments of conversations that painted a damning picture. She described overhearing Sarah and Michael discussing how they had gradually siphoned off company resources through elaborately disguised transactions over the past 2 years. They laughed about the 17 ghost companies, Emily said between bites. Said nobody would ever connect the dots because they were spread across different countries. After dinner, Rich made up the guest room with fresh sheets. You'll be safe here tonight. Get some sleep. Are you going to check what I told you? Emily asked, standing in the doorway of the guest room, suddenly looking every bit the vulnerable 7-year-old she was. Yes, Rich answered honestly. I need to know the truth. Once Emily was settled, Rich retreated to his home office. The ideal merger documents spread before him. He read every line with newfound suspicion, catching subtle clauses that, when combined, would effectively transfer controlling interest to the Japanese investors, with Michael positioned as the primary liaison. He'd nearly missed it all, trusting the summary Sarah had provided. But this wasn't proof of the broader conspiracy Emily had described. For that, he needed access to financial records that would be impossible to obtain without alerting Michael or Sarah. He needed help from someone with inside knowledge, but outside their circle of influence. Rich picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. Sullivan Investigations, came the gruff voice. Jake, it's Richard. Daniels, a pause. Didn't expect to hear from you again, Rich. Not after your partner convinced you I was fabricating evidence. Jake Sullivan had been hired to investigate some financial irregularities the previous year. Michael had swiftly discredited him, presenting evidence that Jake had doctored records to create the appearance of impropriety. Rich had believed Michael and terminated Jake's contract. I need your help, Rich admitted. Discreetly. I think you might have been right. After explaining the situation, omitting the unlikely source of his suspicions, Rich arranged to meet Jake the following morning at 5 a.m., well before the office would open. Rich barely slept, his mind racing through 15 years of friendship and partnership with Michael. Had he missed signs? Had his trust been so complete that he'd become blind to betrayal happening right under his nose? At 4 a.m. he checked on Emily. She was sleeping soundly, curled into a tight ball as if protecting herself even in slumber. The sight stirred something protective in him. Regardless of whether her claims proved true, he couldn't send her back to the streets. The early morning meeting with Jake in a deserted coffee shop 3 miles from Horizon's headquarters was tense. The investigator looked older than Rich remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his salt and pepper hair now more salt than pepper. I need access to the company's financial systems without alerting IT, Rich explained. I need to see if there really are phantom companies and unauthorized transfers. Jake leaned forward. You don't need to access your systems. I've been building a case for the past year, ever since you fired me. Call it a hunch or professional pride. But I knew something wasn't right. He slid a flash drive across the table. 17 shell companies, funneling approximately $5 million over 2 years. Transactions disguised as vendor contracts, consulting fees, licensing agreements. Your partner and assistant have been very thorough. Rich stared at the small device. How did you get this information? I have my methods, Jake said cryptically. And a source inside your company who reached out after I was dismissed. Someone who had suspicions but was systematically sidelined whenever they raised concerns. Who? Robert Martinez, your IT director. Rich frowned. Rob, he reports directly to Michael. They've always seemed close. Jake snorted. Martinez has been documenting irregular system access and unauthorized database queries for months. Thompson has been keeping him away from you, intercepting his requests for meetings. The man's been trying to warn you, Rich. The revelation hit Rich like a physical blow. Rob had been with Horizon for 20 years, even longer than Michael. He'd helped build the company's first servers when they were still working out of Rich's garage. "I need to talk to him," Rich decided. "Already arranged," Jake replied. "He's meeting us at my office in an hour. And Rich," he fixed him with a hard stare, "this time, be ready to listen." As they drove to Jake's office, Rich reflected on the absurdity of his situation. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been finalizing a deal that would take Horizon global. Now, he was sneaking around behind his partner's back, led by the warnings of a homeless child and a disgraced investigator. Jake's office was in a nondescript building in Georgetown, far from the gleaming towers of downtown Seattle. Rob Martinez was already waiting, nervously pacing the small reception area. At 55, Rob was the oldest member of Horizon's executive team, a brilliant systems architect whose modest demeanor belied his technical genius. "Mr. Daniels," he said, relief washing over his features, "thank you for finally meeting with me." "I think you should call me Rich under the circumstances, Rob," he replied, extending his hand. "I understand I owe you an apology for not hearing you out sooner." Rob shook his head. "You couldn't have known. They controlled your schedule, your communications. Every time I flagged unusual activity, Thompson would intervene, explain it away. When I persisted, I found myself excluded from executive meetings, relegated to managing junior staff." Inside Jake's office, Rob connected his laptop to a projector. "I've been documenting everything," he explained as the screen filled with transaction records, email correspondences, and network logs. System access at unusual hours, database queries targeting financial records, emails with coded language. They're about special projects and offshore resources. Rich's stomach churned as the evidence mounted. The betrayal was real, meticulously planned, and far more extensive than even Emily had overheard. His company, his life's work, had nearly been stolen from under him by the people he trusted most. "The merger documents are designed to trigger a complex series of transactions," Rob explained. "Once executed, controlling interest would shift to shell companies that appear to be Japanese investors, but are actually controlled by Thompson, with Jenkins as a secondary beneficiary. You'd retain the title of CEO, but with no actual authority." Rich checked his watch. It was 7:30 a.m. The signing meeting with the Japanese delegation was scheduled for 10 a.m. "We need to stop this," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "But I don't want to just prevent the theft. I want to understand why. I've been generous, with compensation, with equity. Michael and Sarah are already wealthy from Horizon's success." Jake and Rob exchanged glances. "It's not just about money," Jake said quietly. "Based on my investigation, Thompson has been doing this to other tech executives as well. 7 other victims over 5 years. It's a pattern. He enters their lives, as a trusted partner or advisor, works his way into a position of power, then orchestrates a takeover through complex financial engineering." "And Jenkins?" Rich asked, feeling sick. "More complicated," Rob admitted. "There's evidence she was initially manipulated by Thompson. Her mother has been seriously ill, expensive medical treatments, mounting debt. Thompson appears to have leveraged this vulnerability, gradually entangling her in his scheme." Rich thought of the assistant who'd been by his side for a decade, managing his life with quiet efficiency. Had she been another victim, or a willing accomplice? "I need to confront them," Rich decided, face to face, before the meeting. "That's risky," Jake warned. "They might destroy evidence if they know you're onto them." "I'm not suggesting we tip our hand," Rich clarified, a strategy forming in his mind. "But I need to look them in the eyes. I need to understand." As the 3 men developed their plan, Rich's phone rang. It was his home security system. Someone was at his penthouse door. "The girl," he realized with alarm. "I left her alone." Rich raced back to his penthouse, his mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. Had Michael somehow discovered Emily? The security alert showed someone attempting to use the service entrance, not the main door with its biometric lock. He burst into his apartment to find Emily in a standoff with Mrs. Hodgson, his housekeeper of 15 years. "Mr. Daniels," Mrs. Hodgson exclaimed, clutching her cleaning supplies like a shield. I found this child attempting to raid your refrigerator. She claims you invited her to stay, but I was about to call security." Emily stood defiantly by the open refrigerator, a yogurt cup in one hand and a spoon in the other. "I told her you said I could help myself to breakfast," she said, her chin raised, but eyes betraying uncertainty. Rich's tension dissolved into relief. "It's okay, Mrs. Hodgson. Emily is my guest. She'll be staying with me for a while." The housekeeper's eyebrows nearly reached her hairline, but years of professional discretion kept her questions in check. "I see, sir. Shall I prepare the guest room properly then? Perhaps some appropriate clothes and necessities for the young lady." Rich nodded gratefully. "That would be wonderful. Put it on my account." After Mrs. Hodgson departed on her shopping, mission still visibly curious but too professional to pry, Rich sat down with Emily at the breakfast counter. "I thought something had happened to you," he admitted. Pouring himself coffee with a slightly shaking hand, Emily looked surprised. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was," Rich replied, suddenly realizing it was true. In less than 24 hours, this strange, resilient child had become important to him. "Did you find out if I was right?" she asked, scraping the bottom of the yogurt cup. "About your partner and the assistant lady." Rich studied her, still amazed by the circumstances that had brought them together. "Yes, Emily, you were right, and you've saved my company." He hesitated, then added, "How would you like to help me catch them in the act?" Emily's eyes widened, a mixture of excitement and apprehension crossing her face. "What would I have to do?" Rich outlined the plan he'd developed with Jake and Rob. Emily would accompany him to Horizon's headquarters, posing as his niece visiting for the day. She would be their eyes and ears in places adults couldn't inconspicuously access. Most importantly, she would be wearing a recording device provided by Jake, legal in Washington state, as long as one party to the conversation consented. "You want me to be a spy?" Emily asked, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. "A witness," Rich corrected gently. "You've already heard them planning this. I just need you to help record any additional conversations before the meeting. Can you do that?" Emily nodded, solemnly. "I can be invisible when I need to be. It's how I survived on the streets." Rich felt a pang at her matter-of-fact description of her hardship. "After this is over, Emily, we're going to talk about your future. No child should have to learn those kinds of survival skills." By 9 a.m. they had arrived at Horizon Technologies. Rich had called ahead, informing his receptionist that he'd be bringing his niece to work, a story that raised no eyebrows given his well-known devotion to his extended family. Mrs. Hodgson had worked miracles, returning with a selection of clothes that transformed Emily from a street-worn waif to a picture-perfect child in a blue dress and matching headband. "Remember," Rich whispered as they rode the elevator, "stay close to me until we're in my office. Then you can explore, but be careful." Emily nodded, slipping her small hand into his with unexpected trust. The gesture caught Rich off guard, a warm feeling spreading through his chest despite the tension of the morning. Sarah was already at her desk when they arrived, her usual immaculate self in a tailored charcoal suit, her auburn hair pulled back, in a sleek bun. Her professional smile faltered momentarily at the sight of Emily. "Good morning, Mr. Daniels. I wasn't aware you were bringing a guest today," she said, recovering quickly. "Last-minute arrangement," Rich replied casually. "Sarah, this is my niece, Emily. She'll be shadowing me today for a school project on what successful adults do at work." Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she leaned down to Emily's level. "How wonderful to meet you, Emily. Your uncle is a very important man." Emily regarded her with an unchildlike intensity. "He must be, for people to want what he has so badly." An almost imperceptible flash of alarm crossed Sarah's face before she straightened up. "The Japanese delegation will be arriving at 9:45. Michael is already in the conference room preparing. He was hoping to review the final points with you before they arrive." "Perfect," Rich said, sounding every bit the unsuspecting CEO. "Emily, why don't you draw something at my desk while I speak with Mr. Thompson? I won't be long." Emily nodded, her eyes communicating her understanding of the real plan. Once inside his office, Rich positioned her at his desk with paper and colored pencils, then activated the discreet recording device Jake had provided. Similar devices had been placed throughout the executive floor by Rob early that morning. "Be careful," Emily whispered as he turned to leave. Rich found Michael in the conference room, meticulously arranging presentation materials. At 49, Michael Thompson still maintained the athletic build of his college rowing days, his confidence evident in every precise movement. "Rich, there you are," he greeted enthusiastically. "Today's the day we take Horizon International. History in the making." Rich forced a smile, studying the man he'd considered a brother for 15 years. Was there any sign of the betrayal in those familiar features? Any hint of guilt in the eyes that had witnessed the birth of his company? "Indeed it is," Rich agreed, taking a seat. "I was reviewing the contracts last night. Quite complex for what should be a straightforward joint venture." Something flickered across Michael's expression. Concern, irritation. It was gone too quickly to identify. "International business always involves complex legalities," Michael dismissed with a wave of his hand. "That's why we have lawyers. The big picture is what matters, and that picture is Horizon Technologies becoming a global player. And the ownership structure," Rich pressed, maintaining a casual tone. The clauses about operational control seemed unusual. Michael's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Standard protections for cross-cultural partnerships. The Japanese have different business practices. They need assurances that their investment will be properly managed." He leaned forward, lowering his voice confidentially. "Between us, Rich, they weren't comfortable with a single person having so much control. I negotiated the best compromise I could. You remain CEO and the face of the company, while operational decisions become more collaborative." The smooth explanation was delivered with such sincerity that Rich might have believed it 24 hours ago. Now, knowing what he did, he recognized the masterful manipulation. "And the 17 subsidiary companies established over the past 2 years, are those also standard protections?" Rich asked, his tone still conversational but watching Michael intently. The change was subtle but unmistakable, a slight stiffening of Michael's shoulders, a fractional narrowing of his eyes. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. We have our established subsidiaries for tax purposes, of course, but—" "Mr. Daniels," Sarah interrupted, opening the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent matter requiring your attention. A Mr. Martinez from IT says it can't wait." Rich noted the quick glance exchanged between Michael and Sarah. "Tell him I'll be right there," he replied, standing. To Michael, he added, "We'll continue this discussion later, perhaps after the meeting." In the hallway, Sarah kept pace beside him, tablet in hand. "The delegation has just arrived in the lobby. Shall I have them escorted up while you deal with Martinez?" "No," Rich said firmly. "Have them wait. Whatever Rob needs to show me might be relevant to our discussions." Sarah's composure slipped for just a moment. "I'm sure it's just another one of his technical concerns. Michael has been handling those issues specifically to spare you the details." "Nevertheless, I'd like to see for myself," Rich insisted. His office, he found Rob waiting with a laptop, his expression grave. Emily was still at the desk, seemingly absorbed in her drawing but clearly listening to every word. "What did you find?" Rich asked, closing the door. Rob turned the laptop to show a series of financial reports. They accelerated the timeline. "Transfers have already been initiated to clear the way for the ownership shift once you sign. $5 million moved through the shell companies just this morning." Rich felt cold fury building inside him. "Can you reverse it?" "Not without executive override codes," Rob said, "which is why I came to you directly." Rich entered his authentication credentials, allowing Rob to halt and reverse the transactions. "Sarah was very insistent that I not meet with you. How long has she been running interference?" "At least a year," Rob confirmed. "Every time I discovered something suspicious, she would intercept my reports. Eventually, Michael restructured the department so that I reported through him rather than directly to you. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture of calculated isolation. Rich had been systematically cut off from those who might have warned him, surrounded instead by those loyal to Michael. "Uncle Rich?" Emily spoke up, using the cover story even in private. The lady with the red shoes is listening at the door. All three men turned toward the closed office door. Rich moved silently across the room and yanked it open. Sarah stumbled forward, clearly having had her ear pressed against the door. Her professional mask slipped completely, revealing a flash of panic before she composed herself. "I was just checking if you needed anything before the meeting," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Rich regarded her with new eyes. 10 years of loyal service, or so he'd thought. "Actually, Sarah, I do need something. The truth." Sarah's gaze darted between Rich, Rob, and Emily, calculation visible in her expression. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, vulnerability replacing her usual efficiency. "Rich, please, you don't understand. I had no choice. My mother's medical bills." "Save it for the authorities." Rich cut her off, unmoved. "I know everything. The shell companies, the diverted funds, the manipulated merger documents. The only question remaining is whether you were a victim of Michael's manipulation or a willing participant." Sarah's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You've always been too trusting, Rich. Too focused on your precious innovation to see what was happening right under your nose. For years, I've managed your life while you played visionary." She laughed bitterly. "You never even noticed when I tried to warn you. The errors I deliberately left in reports, the inconsistencies I flagged in meetings that Michael quickly dismissed." Rich was taken aback. "You're claiming you tried to alert me?" "At first," she admitted, "before I realized it was pointless. Michael had you completely under his thumb, the loyal friend, the brilliant strategist. Nobody could get through to you." Her gaze hardened. "Eventually, I had to look out for myself. By stealing from the company that employed you? By betraying the man who trusted you." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Loyalty? In business? Grow up, Rich. Michael showed me how the world really works. Everyone takes what they can get. We just did it more efficiently than most." As Rich stared at the woman he'd trusted with every aspect of his professional life, he felt Emily's small hand slip into his. The simple gesture of support steadied him. "The Japanese delegation is waiting," he said quietly, "and so is Michael. I think it's time we all had a conversation about the future of Horizon Technologies." Sarah's confident facade cracked slightly. "What are you going to do?" Rich's expression was resolute as he looked down at Emily, then back to Sarah. "What this brave girl taught me to do. Stand up for what's mine." The Horizon Technologies conference room had been designed to impress, with its panoramic view of Seattle's skyline and a massive oval table crafted from a single slab of redwood. Now it served as the stage for a corporate drama 15 years in the making. The Japanese delegation, 3 serious men in impeccable suits, sat on one side of the table, their expressions betraying growing impatience. Michael stood at the head of the table, his charismatic smile straining as he checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. When Rich finally entered, he was flanked by Rob Martinez and Jake Sullivan, with Sarah trailing reluctantly behind. Emily remained in Rich's office, the recording devices active and monitored by one of Jake's associates. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay," Rich addressed the Japanese businessman with a respectful bow. "I'm Richard Daniels, founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies. I believe we need to reframe our discussions today." Michael stepped forward, his smile fixed. "Rich, these gentlemen have traveled a long way. Perhaps we should proceed with the agenda as planned and save internal matters for later." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Rich replied calmly, "as our internal matters directly impact what you've been led to believe about this partnership." He turned to the delegation. "Gentlemen, I regret to inform you that you have been misled. The partnership terms presented to you contain significant misrepresentations of Horizon's structure, finances, and leadership intentions." The lead Japanese businessman, Mr. Tanaka, frowned deeply. "Mr. Daniels, these are serious allegations. Mr. Thompson has assured us that all terms were approved by you personally." "That was the first misrepresentation," Rich confirmed. "I only received the full documents yesterday, and upon careful review, discovered they would effectively transfer control of my company, without fair compensation. Michael's composed facade began to crack. "Rich, you're embarrassing yourself and our company. Whatever concerns you have can be addressed privately." "Like you've been addressing Rob's concerns for the past year," Rich countered. "By isolating him. By restructuring the reporting lines to keep him away from me." The Japanese businessman watched the exchange with growing discomfort. Mr. Tanaka cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reschedule while Horizon resolves these internal issues." "That won't be necessary," Michael interjected quickly. "This is simply a miscommunication. Rich has been under tremendous pressure lately and—" "Show them, Rob," Rich instructed, cutting Michael off. Rob connected his laptop to the conference room's projection system. On the massive screen appeared documentation of the 17 shell companies, the systematic diversion of funds, and the clauses buried in the merger agreement that would have stripped Rich of actual control while maintaining a facade of leadership. The Japanese delegation's expressions hardened as they recognized how they had been manipulated as unwitting pawns in Michael's scheme. "This partnership was never about expanding Horizon's global reach," Rich explained. "It was designed to facilitate a takeover using your reputation as cover." Michael's charm evaporated entirely, replaced by cold calculation. "You can't prove any of this is unauthorized. As co-founder and CFO, I have broad discretion in financial structuring. Everything I've done has been for the benefit of Horizon." "Including the $5 million diverted to personal accounts?" Rich challenged. "Including the systematic sabotage of anyone who questioned your methods?" Before Michael could respond, the conference room door opened and Emily walked in, followed by Jake's associate. The little girl moved with purpose, holding a tablet. "Emily, I asked you to wait in my office," Rich said, concerned. "I know, but you need to hear this," she insisted, her young voice carrying surprising authority in the tense room. She handed the tablet to Jake, who connected it to the speakers. Michael's voice filled the room. "Once Daniel signs tomorrow, control transfers immediately through the tiered ownership structure. The old fool won't even realize what happened until it's too late. He'll be a figurehead with a nice salary, but zero actual power." Sarah's voice followed. "What about Martinez in IT? He's been asking questions again." "Martinez is a relic," Michael's recorded voice dismissed. "Keep him busy with meaningless projects. If he becomes a real problem, we'll restructure again and push him into early retirement." The recording continued, revealing detailed discussions of the scheme, complete with Michael's disparaging comments about Rich as an obedient puppy and sentimental imbecile who was too trusting for his own good. As his own voice condemned him, Michael's expression transformed, the mask of the charming business partner giving way to cold fury. "You recorded private conversations? That's illegal corporate espionage." "One-party consent is legal in Washington state," Jake pointed out calmly. "And we had consent from several parties present during these discussions." Mr. Tanaka stood abruptly. "We will be withdrawing from all negotiations with Horizon Technologies. Our legal team will contact you regarding potential misrepresentation claims." With formal bows, the Japanese delegation exited the room, leaving the Horizon leadership in their wake. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at Rich, calculation visible behind his eyes. 15 years, Rich. 15 years I've helped build this company, made it what it is today. You think you can just push me out based on a few out-of-context recordings? It's not just the recordings, Michael, Rich replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil beneath. It's the financial records, the witness testimonies, the systematic betrayal of everything we supposedly built together. Michael's gaze shifted to Emily, who stood beside Rich with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. And you're basing all this on the word of a street urchin? Some homeless brat who probably concocted this whole story to scam you? Rich felt Emily stiffen beside him. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder. This street urchin, as you call her, showed more loyalty and integrity in one day than you have in 15 years. She risked everything to warn a complete stranger about a betrayal. What does that say about her character compared to yours? Michael's face twisted with disdain. Always the soft touch, This is exactly why you were so easy to manipulate, Rich. You lead with your heart instead of your head. In business, that's a fatal weakness. I used to think so too, Rich admitted. I thought trust was a liability, but now I see it differently. Trust, properly placed, is strength. It's what built Horizon, not scheming and manipulation, but innovation and collaboration. He looked down at Emily, then back at his former friend. You could have had it all legitimately, Michael. Your compensation package was generous. Your equity stake substantial. Was it really worth destroying our friendship, your reputation, and potentially your freedom for more? For just a moment, something like regret flickered across Michael's face. You don't understand, it was never enough. I was always in your shadow, the other founder, your name on the building, your face in the press. Even when my strategies doubled our revenue, it was Daniel's visionary leadership that got the credit. So this was about ego? Rich asked incredulously. About recognition? It was about getting what I deserved, Michael snapped, his composure fully cracking. I deserved control. I deserved to be the one making the final decisions. For years I've been the real brains behind Horizon's success, while you played innovation guru and collected the accolades. Sarah, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. It wasn't just about ego, Rich. Michael convinced me you were leading the company toward collapse, with your focus on innovation over profitability. He showed me projections, data suggesting we were headed for disaster unless control shifted. Rich turned to her, genuine hurt in his expression. And you believed him without ever coming to me directly? After 10 years working together? Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. He was very persuasive. And then once I was complicit in the smaller transgressions, there was no going back. He made sure of that. Jake stepped forward. This has been illuminating, but we should move this conversation to the proper authorities. I've documented enough evidence for formal charges of conspiracy, embezzlement, and corporate fraud. Michael's expression hardened. You really want to do this the hard way, Rich? Dragging our company through a public scandal. Think of the shareholders, the employees, our market position. I am thinking of them, Rich replied firmly. I'm thinking of the 500 families that depend on Horizon for their livelihoods. I'm thinking of the investors who trusted us with their capital. They all deserve better than leadership built on lies. He turned to Jake. Call your contacts at the FBI's white-collar division. They'll want to see everything we've gathered. As Jake made the call, Michael's calculated demeanor returned. This isn't over, Rich. Corporate cases are complicated, expensive, drawn out. Even if you win, Horizon loses. No, Michael, Rich replied quietly. Horizon started losing the moment you decided your ego was more important than our mission. But as of today, we start rebuilding with integrity. Security arrived to escort Michael and Sarah to separate conference rooms where they would await federal agents. As they left, Emily tugged on Rich's sleeve. Did I do okay? She asked, suddenly. Just a child again seeking approval. Rich knelt down to her level, overwhelmed by what this remarkable girl had done. You did more than okay, Emily. You saved my company. You saved everything I've worked for. Emily's serious expression gave way to a small, proud smile. I just told the truth. My foster mom always said the truth comes out eventually. Your foster mom was right, Rich agreed, a lump forming in his throat as he thought about this child's uncertain situation. Emily, where is your family now? Your real family? Emily's smile faded. I don't know. The social workers couldn't find any relatives who wanted me. That's why I was in foster care. Rich made a decision then, one that would change both their lives forever. Emily, would you like to stay with me while we try to find your family? My home is certainly big enough. Emily's eyes widened with hope and caution, the wary expression of a child who had learned that good things rarely lasted. You mean it? You wouldn't send me back? I promise, Rich said solemnly. We'll figure this out together. As federal agents arrived to take statements and collect evidence, Rich sat with Emily in his office, away from the corporate chaos unfolding throughout the building. For the first time in years, despite the professional betrayal he'd experienced, he felt a curious sense of peace. What happens to your company now? Emily asked. swinging her legs from the oversized chair. "We rebuild," Rich said simply, "with people we can trust." Emily considered this. How do you know who to trust? Rich looked at the remarkable child who had appeared in his life, like a guardian angel in a moment of crisis. Sometimes, trust comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes, the people most worth trusting are those who have nothing to gain by telling you the truth. The weeks following the confrontation at Horizon Technologies were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, corporate restructuring, and personal adjustments. Michael and Sarah were formally charged with multiple counts of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, leading both to accept plea agreements rather than face lengthy trials. Michael received a 12-year sentence, while Sarah, whose cooperation and evidence of initial attempts to warn Rich factored into her sentencing, received 8 years. The financial recovery process began immediately, with forensic accountants tracking down and reclaiming the diverted funds. Through it all, Emily remained with Rich. What had started as a temporary arrangement quickly evolved into something more permanent as they developed a routine together. Rich converted his home office into a proper bedroom for her, allowing Emily to choose the colors and decorations. The first time in her young life she'd been given such agency over her living space. Purple walls with silver stars, she had decided with the seriousness of a CEO making a critical business decision, and bookshelves, lots of bookshelves. Rich discovered that behind Emily's street-smart exterior was a child with an insatiable curiosity and remarkable intelligence. Despite her irregular education, she devoured books well beyond her grade level and showed an intuitive understanding of complex concepts. One evening, as Rich helped Emily with a science project, a model of the solar system that had taken over his dining room table, the social worker assigned to Emily's case arrived for her monthly visit. "Ms. Chen, please come in," Rich greeted the compassionate but no-nonsense woman who was monitoring Emily's placement. Lisa Chen surveyed the chaos of the dining room, paints, styrofoam balls, and reference books scattered across the table, with approval. "I see you two have been busy." Emily proudly displayed the half-completed model. "I'm showing the relative distances to scale. Most models don't do that because space is really big." "I'm impressed," Ms. Chen said genuinely before turning to Rich. "Mr. Daniels, could we speak privately for a moment?" In the living room, Ms. Chen got straight to the point. "I've received the results of the family search you commissioned. It's unusual. I thought you should see this before we discuss next steps with Emily." She handed him a file. Inside was a genealogical report tracing Emily's family history. Rich's eyes widened as he read the conclusion. "This can't be right," he whispered. "We double-checked," Ms. Chen confirmed. "Emily's maternal grandmother and your paternal grandmother were first cousins. You and Emily are distant relatives, third cousins once removed to be precise. Her family name was changed through a remarriage, which is why the connection wasn't immediately apparent." Rich sat heavily on the couch, stunned by the revelation. "So she's actually my family, legally?" "Yes, distant, but yes. Her grandmother, Mary Wilson, was cousin to your grandmother, Elizabeth Daniels. The family lost touch about 30 years ago after a relocation to the Midwest." "That's incredible," Rich murmured, thinking of the strange twist of fate that had brought Emily into his car that rainy night. "Does this affect her foster status?" "It could," Ms. Chen explained. "As a blood relative, however distant, you would have priority consideration if you applied for kinship care or even adoption. It would significantly streamline the process compared to a non-relative adoption." Rich looked toward the dining room, where Emily was carefully painting Neptune a deep blue, her face a study in concentration. "I'd like to pursue that immediately. The adoption, I mean." Ms. Chen smiled, though her professional demeanor remained. "I thought you might say that. I've brought the preliminary paperwork, but Mr. Daniels, have you considered what this would mean for your life? Single parenthood is challenging under any circumstances, let alone for someone with your professional responsibilities." I'm restructuring those responsibilities, Rich replied without hesitation. Horizon is appointing a new COO to handle day-to-day operations. I'll remain as CEO, but with a focus on strategic direction and innovation, my true strengths anyway. He looked Ms. Chen directly in the eye. The past month has clarified a lot of things for me. I've spent 20 years building a company at the expense of building a family. Emily changed that equation the moment she appeared in my back seat. After Ms. Chen left with the initial paperwork filed, Rich returned to the dining room, his mind reeling from the discovery. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, picking up on his distracted demeanor. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, absolutely not," Rich assured her quickly. "In fact, I just learned something amazing." He sat beside her, carefully moving a half-painted Saturn out of the way. "Emily, how would you feel about staying with me permanently, not just as my ward, but as my adopted daughter?" Emily's paintbrush froze mid-stroke, her eyes widening. "You want to adopt me for real?" "For real," Rich confirmed, "and there's something else. Ms. Chen found out through the family search that we're actually related, distant cousins. Your grandmother Mary was my grandmother Elizabeth's cousin." Emily sat absolutely still, processing this information. Her analytical mind, so much like Rich's own, was visible in her thoughtful expression. "So I'm not just some random kid. I'm actually your family." "You are," Rich said softly. "Which might explain why you felt compelled to warn me that night. Maybe there was some kind of family instinct at work." Emily considered this possibility, then shook her head. "I don't think it was that. I think I just didn't like seeing someone get hurt when I could stop it." She looked up at him with those serious blue eyes. "But I like that we're family. It means you can't change your mind about keeping me." The statement, so matter-of-fact yet revealing such deep insecurity, broke Rich's heart. "Emily, I wouldn't change my mind regardless. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to be there for each other no matter what." Emily studied his face with the careful scrutiny she'd developed through years of assessing adults' trustworthiness. Whatever. She saw there must have satisfied her, because she suddenly launched herself into his arms, the first time she had initiated physical affection. "Then yes," she whispered against his shoulder, "I want you to adopt me." The next morning, Rich brought Emily to Horizon headquarters for the first time since the confrontation. The company was still finding its equilibrium after the scandal, but the mood was one of cautious optimism. With the conspirators removed and the stolen funds largely recovered, employees were rallying around Rich's renewed vision for the company. In his office, Rich introduced Emily to Diane Foster, Horizon's newly promoted COO, who had been a trusted department head for 8 years. "So you're the remarkable young lady who saved our company," Diane said warmly, extending her hand to Emily with the same respect she would show an adult. Emily shook it solemnly. "I just told the truth. Rich did the hard part." "Well, your truth-telling changed everything," Diane replied, "and now I understand why Rich is restructuring his role here." Rich had spent the previous week working with the board to redefine his position. As he told Ms. Chen, he would remain CEO but focus primarily on innovation strategy and product vision, his true passions, while Diane would manage operations and execution. "I've spent 20 years working 60-hour weeks," he explained to Emily as they toured the building. "That's not compatible with being a good father. This new arrangement means I'll be home for dinner most nights and can take you to school in the mornings." Emily processed this with her usual thoughtfulness. "You're changing your whole life for me." "I'm changing it for us," Rich corrected, gently. "And honestly, I should have made these changes years ago. No company is worth sacrificing a balanced life for." As they walked the corridors of Horizon, employees smiled and greeted them. Many had been shocked by Michael and Sarah's betrayal, but the transparent way Rich had handled the aftermath, communicating openly about what had happened and involving staff in the rebuilding process, had strengthened company morale rather than destroying it. In the IT department, they found Rob Martinez directing his team through a security overhaul. When he spotted Rich and Emily, his serious expression softened. "The dynamic duo," he exclaimed, coming over to greet them. "How's our young corporate savior doing today?" Emily smiled shyly. "I'm good. Rich is showing me where he works. It's really big. And getting bigger, Rob confirmed. Without the resource diversion, we've discovered our profitability is actually 22% higher than reported. The board has approved expansion of the R&D division. Rich nodded, pleased. That's what happens when you remove parasites from a healthy system. The whole organism thrives. As they continued their tour, they passed what had been Michael's office, now being repurposed as a collaborative innovation space. Emily stopped, staring at the room. "Does it make you sad?" she asked Rich. "About your friend, I mean." Rich considered the question carefully. "I'm sad about who I thought he was, the friend I believed I had for 15 years. But that person never really existed. He was a fiction Michael created to gain my trust." Emily nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "Like my last foster dad, he pretended to be nice until the social worker left, then he turned mean. People wear masks." "Some do," Rich agreed. "But not everyone. Rob didn't. Jake didn't. They tried to tell the truth even when it was difficult." He squeezed her hand. "And you didn't wear a mask either, Emily. You risked everything to tell a stranger the truth." As they reached the elevator, Emily looked up at him with sudden intensity. "I don't want to be Rich Jr." Rich blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "What do you mean?" "When you adopt me, I don't want to take over your company someday just because I'm your daughter. I want to earn things myself." Rich was struck by the maturity of the concern. "Emily, you will never have to be anyone but yourself. If someday you're interested in business, that's wonderful. If you want to be an artist or a scientist or anything else, that's equally wonderful. My job as your father will be to help you discover your own path, not push you down mine." Emily appeared satisfied with this answer. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, she leaned against his side comfortably. "I think I might like business, though. It's like a complicated puzzle where the pieces keep changing." Rich laughed, recognizing his own early fascination with entrepreneurship in her observation. "That's exactly what it is, a puzzle that never quite stays solved." As they exited the building into the Seattle sunshine, a rare enough occurrence to feel like a good omen, Rich felt a profound sense of rightness. The company he'd built had nearly been stolen through betrayal, yet somehow the result was a life more whole than the one he'd had before. The universe had sent him a guardian angel in the form of a 7-year-old girl, and in saving his company, she had saved something far more important, his capacity to care for something more deeply than work, to prioritize connection over achievement, to build not just a business legacy, but a family one. "Ice cream," he suggested impulsively, pointing toward a shop across the street. Emily's face lit up with simple childhood joy, an expression that was becoming more frequent as she settled into the security of her new life. "Rocky Road with extra marshmallows?" "Absolutely," Rich agreed. "We're celebrating after all." "What are we celebrating?" Emily asked as they waited for the crossing signal. Rich smiled down at his soon-to-be daughter, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together. "New beginnings, Emily, for both of us." 6 months after the day Emily had hidden in his Tesla, Rich stood in the Seattle family court, his heart pounding with anticipation. Beside him, Emily fidgeted with the collar of her navy blue dress, her blonde hair neatly braided for the occasion. Ms. Chen sat on Emily's other side, a folder of final adoption documents on her lap. "Nervous?" Rich whispered to Emily as they waited for the judge. "A little," she admitted. "What if the judge says no?" Rich squeezed her hand reassuringly. "All the paperwork is in order. The home study is complete. Our family connection has been verified. There's no reason for the judge to say no." Emily nodded, but her hand remained tightly gripped in his. The past 6 months had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The adoption process had been expedited due to their blood relation, but still required thorough vetting, home studies, and legal procedures. Throughout it all, Emily had gradually blossomed from the wary street survivor into a more carefree child, though her remarkable intellect and old soul wisdom remained intact. She had started at Seattle Preparatory Academy, where initial academic assessments had placed her 2 grade levels ahead in reading and mathematics, despite her disrupted education. Rich had undergone his own transformation. His restructured role at Horizon allowed him to be home by 6 most evenings, with mornings dedicated to taking Emily to school before heading to the office. Weekends became sacred family time rather than opportunities to catch up on work. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elaine Watkins, the bailiff announced. Judge Watkins, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with kind eyes that belied her formal demeanor, reviewed the case file carefully before addressing them. Mr. Daniels, I've reviewed your petition to adopt Emily Wilson, who is your third cousin once removed. The home study reports are exemplary, and Ms. Chen's recommendations are among the strongest I've seen in my 15 years on the bench. She turned her attention to Emily. Young lady, I understand you're 7 years old. That's old enough to have a say in these proceedings. Can you tell me, in your own words, if you want Mr. Daniels to adopt you as your father? Emily stood, her posture straight, despite her nervousness. Yes, Your Honor. I want to be adopted by Mr. Daniels. He takes care of me and helps me with my homework and never breaks his promises. He's teaching me to swim and doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. The judge's stern expression softened at Emily's earnest response. And do you understand what adoption means? That Mr. Daniels will be your legal father permanently? Emily nodded solemnly. It means he's my forever family and I'm his. Nobody can take me away again. Judge Watkins turned to Rich. Mr. Daniels, raising a child is a lifelong commitment, particularly a child who has experienced the kind of instability and hardship that Emily has. Are you prepared for this responsibility? Rich stood, addressing the court with the same sincerity he would use for his most important business presentations. Your Honor, 6 months ago, Emily saved everything I had built professionally by warning me about a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. But more importantly, she saved me from a life that had become unbalanced and ultimately empty despite my financial success. He looked at Emily with undisguised affection. I went into this process thinking I was helping a child in need. I've discovered instead that we were meant to help each other. Emily isn't just a responsibility to me. She's a gift I never knew I needed. So yes, I am fully committed to being her father for the rest of my life. Judge Watkins reviewed the documents one final time, then smiled. Based on the evidence before me, I find this adoption to be in the best interest of the child. The petition is granted. Emily Wilson is hereby legally adopted by Richard Daniels and shall henceforth be known as Emily Wilson Daniels, with all the rights and privileges thereto. She banged her gavel, making the adoption official. Congratulations to both of you. May you build a wonderful life together. Emily's face broke into a radiant smile as she threw her arms around Rich. We did it. We're officially family now. The courtroom erupted in applause from the small gathering of witnesses. Rob Martinez, Jake Sullivan, Diane Foster, and several other Horizon employees who had become part of their extended support system. As they exited the courthouse into the bright Seattle day, Jake approached with a gift-wrapped package. A little something to commemorate the occasion, he said, handing it to Emily. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautifully framed photograph of her and Rich, taken during a company picnic the previous month. They were laughing together, their resemblance, the same blue eyes, the same smile, surprisingly evident despite their distant relation. Thank you, Emily said, hugging the frame to her chest. It's perfect. The celebration continued at Rich's penthouse, now truly their home, where Mrs. Hodgson had prepared a feast for the gathered friends. The apartment had transformed over the months, softening from its former bachelor austerity into a warm family home. Emily's artwork decorated the refrigerator, children's books mingled with business texts on the shelves, and photographs chronicled their evolving relationship. As the party wound down, Rich found himself on the balcony, gazing out at the Seattle skyline. Rob joined him, offering a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, Rob toasted, and to unexpected blessings. Rich clinked his glass against Rob's. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost grateful for Michael and Sarah's betrayal. Without it, I would never have found Emily. Rob nodded thoughtfully. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. He sipped his champagne. Speaking of outcomes, the quarterly results came in yesterday. We're up 40% compared to this time last year. Without parasites draining resources, the system thrives. Rich quoted his own observation from months earlier. It's more than just stopping the bleeding, Rob countered. It's the new direction. The educational technology division you greenlit is outperforming projections by 30%. Turns out there's a massive market for quality educational software. The educational technology division had been Rich's first major initiative after restructuring his role. Inspired by Emily's accelerated learning needs, he had realized the gap in the market for sophisticated yet accessible educational tools. Emily's been beta testing the new science modules, Rich mentioned. Her feedback is surprisingly insightful for a 7-year-old. 8 tomorrow, Rob reminded him with a smile. Big day. Rich nodded, feeling a surge of happiness. Emily's 8th birthday would be her first celebrated with a real family, and he had spent weeks ensuring everything would be perfect. Later that evening, after all the guests had departed, Rich found Emily in her bedroom, carefully arranging her new family photograph on her nightstand. Big day, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. How does it feel to be officially Emily Wilson Daniels? She considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. Good. Safe. She looked up at him. But you know what's weird? I think I would have felt like your daughter even without the judge saying so. The paper just makes it official for everyone else. Rich was struck by the wisdom in her observation. You're right. Family is what you feel, not just what's written on documents. Emily climbed under her covers, the silver. Stars on her purple walls catching the soft light from her bedside lamp. Rich, should I call you Dad now? The question caught him off guard, filling him with unexpected emotion. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Emily. Rich is fine if that's more comfortable. Dad is wonderful if and when you're ready. There's no rush. She nodded, processing this. I think maybe Dad is good, but maybe not all the time yet. Is that okay? That's perfectly okay, he assured her, tucking the blankets around her. Everything about this is on your timeline, not mine. As he kissed her forehead goodnight, Emily caught his hand. Tomorrow at my birthday party, will you tell me the story again? About how I saved your company? I like that story. Rich smiled. I'll tell it as many times as you want to hear it. It's the beginning of our family story, after all. The next day, Emily's birthday celebration was everything Rich had hoped it would be. Her new classmates from Seattle Prep came, along with the Horizon employees who had become their extended family. The penthouse was transformed with decorations, games, and a cake shaped like the solar system, a nod to Emily's fascination with astronomy. During a quiet moment as the children played, Diane approached Rich. She's thriving, she observed, watching Emily laugh with her friends. It's remarkable considering what she's been through. Children are resilient, Rich replied, more so than adults sometimes. But she still has moments of insecurity, nightmares about being abandoned again. Diane nodded understandingly. Healing takes time, but she has something now she didn't have before, stability, consistency, knowing with absolute certainty that she's loved and valued. Speaking of valued, Rich segued, I've been thinking about that educational foundation we discussed. I want to move forward with it. The idea had been percolating for months, a foundation to support children in situations similar to Emily's, with a focus on educational opportunities and stability. I've drafted a proposal, Diane said, unsurprised. 200 scholarships, annually to start, with comprehensive support services beyond just tuition. We can have it operational by next quarter if you're serious. I am, Rich confirmed, with Emily as honorary president when she's a bit older, if she's interested. No pressure, of course. Diane smiled knowingly. Something tells me she'll be very interested. That child has a helper's heart just like her father. As the party continued around them, Rich watched Emily in her element, confident, happy, secure in the knowledge that she belonged. The contrast with the wary child who had hidden in his car just 6 months earlier was profound. That night, after the guests had departed and the gifts had been opened, Rich and Emily sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets against the evening, chill, stargazing through the telescope he'd given her for her birthday. "Dad," Emily said, the words still new but increasingly natural on her lips, "do you think there are other kids like me? Who needs someone like you?" Rich looked at his daughter, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights. "I'm sure there are. Why do you ask?" Emily adjusted the telescope thoughtfully. "I was thinking maybe we could help them. Not adopt all of them, that would be too many kids," she clarified pragmatically. "But maybe help them find their own families, or help them go to good schools like mine." Rich smiled, once again amazed by her compassion. "As a matter of fact, I've been thinking the same thing. Diane and I are working on creating a foundation to do exactly that." Emily's face lit up. "Really? Can I help? I know what it's like to be them. I could tell you what would have helped me." "I was hoping you'd say that," Rich admitted. "In fact, I was thinking that when you're older, you might want to be the foundation's president." "President," Emily repeated, testing the word. "Like you're president of Horizon?" "Similar, yes. You'd help decide how best to use the resources to help children who need it most." Emily considered this seriously, then nodded. "I'd like that, but I still want to finish school first, and maybe college." Rich laughed, pulling her into a side hug. "Definitely college. There's no rush, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world now." As they continued their stargazing, Rich reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. A business betrayal that had led to the greatest blessing of his life, a corporate crisis that had resulted in a family bond stronger than any business partnership. The company that had once been his entire world was now just one part of a much richer life, a life measured not in stock valuations and market share, but in bedtime stories, school projects, and the growing confidence in his daughter's smile. 5. Years had passed since the day Emily had climbed into Rich's Tesla with a warning that changed both their lives forever. At 12 years old, she had blossomed into a confident, compassionate young woman with her father's analytical mind and a natural empathy that was entirely her own. The Wilson Daniels Foundation had become one of Seattle's most respected philanthropic organizations, providing educational opportunities for over 200 vulnerable children annually. True to their agreement, Emily had been named honorary president on her 12th birthday, a role she approached with characteristic seriousness and dedication. On a crisp autumn morning, Emily stood at a podium in the newly completed Wilson Daniels Educational Center, addressing the gathered crowd at its official opening. Despite her youth, she commanded attention with a poise that belied her years. "5 years ago, I was a 7-year-old with no home and little hope," she began, her voice steady despite the personal nature of her speech. "Today, I stand before you as proof that circumstances don't define potential. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to dream without limits." Rich watched from the side of the stage, his chest tight with pride. The educational center represented the culmination of their shared vision, a place where children from disadvantaged backgrounds could access tutoring, technology, counseling, and community support in a safe, nurturing environment. "My father taught me that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute," Emily continued. "This center is our contribution, a place where potential meets opportunity, where children like the one I used to be can find their path forward." As she concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Rich marveled at how much his own perspective had evolved. The man who had once measured his worth by corporate achievements now found his greatest satisfaction in watching his daughter grow into her own person. Horizon Technologies had thrived in the years following the thwarted takeover attempt. Under Diane Foster's operational leadership and Rich's strategic vision, the company had expanded its focus to include educational technology, rising to become one of the top 100 corporations in the nation's competitive tech sector. The scandal that had threatened to destroy Horizon had instead become a footnote in its history, a painful but necessary cleansing that had ultimately strengthened the organization. Michael and Sarah remained in federal prison, their betrayal now a cautionary tale in business ethics seminars. After the ceremony, Rich and Emily walked through the center's bright corridors, observing the already busy classrooms and activity spaces. Children of various ages worked on computers, collaborated on projects, or received one-on-one tutoring from volunteer mentors. "What do you think?" Emily asked, watching her father's reaction. "Is it everything we hoped for?" "It's more," Rich replied honestly. "When we first discussed this, I was thinking about scholarships, financial support. You're the one who insisted on creating a physical space, a community. You were right." Emily smiled, pleased by his acknowledgement. Their relationship had evolved into a true partnership, with Rich valuing her perspective as much as she valued his guidance. "I remember what it was like," she explained, "to have nowhere that felt safe. No place where I truly belonged. Money for education is important, but having a place to come to every day where people know your name and care about your progress, that's what really changes lives." They paused at a window overlooking the center's garden, where several children were planting fall bulbs under the supervision of a horticulture teacher. "You've become quite the public speaker," Rich observed, "very different from the little girl who used to hide behind me at company functions." Emily laughed. "I had a good teacher. Besides, it's easy to speak confidently when you believe in what you're saying." As they continued their tour, they encountered Jake Sullivan, who had transitioned from private investigation to serving as the Foundation's security director. His expertise in background checks and security protocols had proven invaluable in creating a safe environment for vulnerable children. "Impressive speech, Miss President," Jake greeted Emily with a wink. "The reporters are asking for follow-up. Interviews?" "Tell them I'm booked solid with 7th grade math and a soccer match this afternoon," Emily replied with a grin. Jake turned to Rich. "The governors from 2 neighboring states have requested information about replicating the program. Apparently your daughter's persuasive abilities extend beyond the podium." Rich nodded, unsurprised. During the center's planning phase, Emily had joined him for meetings with potential donors and government officials, her authentic passion for the project often proving more compelling than any professional presentation. "Send them the implementation framework we developed," Rich instructed, "and schedule a video conference for next week. If other states want to adopt this model, we should support that effort." As Jake departed to handle the requests, Rob Martinez approached, tablet in hand. Now Horizon's CTO, Rob had been instrumental in developing the educational software used throughout the center. "The adaptive learning platform is performing beyond expectations," he reported enthusiastically. "The algorithms are accurately identifying learning gaps and adjusting content difficulty in real time. We're seeing comprehension improvements, averaging 23% in the trial groups." Emily leaned over to examine the data on his tablet. "What about the struggling readers group? Are they showing similar gains?" Rob smiled at her technical interest. "Even better, 28% improvement. Your suggestion to incorporate game mechanics for that demographic was spot on." Rich observed this exchange with quiet satisfaction. Emily's natural intelligence had flourished with proper education and encouragement. She moved easily between the worlds of business, technology, and philanthropy, absorbing knowledge like a sponge while maintaining the compassionate heart that had first led her to warn a stranger about betrayal. Later that afternoon, as Rich watched Emily's soccer match from the sidelines, he reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. The bitter corporate betrayal that might have destroyed everything he'd built had instead given him something far more valuable: a family. Emily scored a goal, her teammates swarming around her in celebration. She glanced toward the sidelines, finding Rich among the parents and giving him a quick thumbs up before returning to the game. That evening, after a celebration dinner with the Foundation team, Rich and Emily returned to their home, no longer the sterile penthouse of a workaholic bachelor, but a warm family home filled with photographs, achievements, and memories. As was their tradition on milestone days, they settled on the balcony with hot chocolate, gazing at the Seattle skyline illuminated against the night sky. "I've been thinking," Emily said, wrapping her hands around her mug, "about Michael and Sarah." Rich looked at her, surprised. They rarely discussed the conspirators who had inadvertently brought them together. What about them? Their sentences are almost halfway complete, she observed. Do you ever think about visiting them, asking them why they did it? Rich considered the question thoughtfully. I used to, especially in the early days. I wanted to understand how 15 years of friendship could be discarded so easily. But eventually, I realized that no explanation would ever be satisfactory. Emily nodded, processing his response. I think I understand. Sometimes the why doesn't really matter as much as what you do afterward. Exactly, Rich agreed, impressed by her insight. Their betrayal was painful, but what we've built in its aftermath, our family, the foundation, Horizon's renewed purpose, that's what truly matters. Emily sipped her hot chocolate contemplatively. Dad, do you think they regret what they did? Not just getting caught, but actually hurting you? The question revealed Emily's fundamental compassion, her ability to consider the humanity even of those who had caused harm. It was a quality Rich had come to deeply admire in his daughter. I don't know, he answered honestly. Michael's ego might prevent true regret. Sarah, he paused, remembering her complex motivations. Sarah might. She was trapped in a situation partly of her own making, but also manipulated by circumstances and by Michael. Like my last foster family, Emily mused. They weren't bad people exactly, just overwhelmed and making bad choices. Rich nodded, continually amazed by her capacity for understanding. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, he said softly. It's building something so beautiful and meaningful that their betrayal becomes insignificant in comparison. Emily smiled, recognizing his words. You told me that the day after the adoption was finalized. I've never forgotten it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle against the darkness. The Seattle skyline included the Horizon Technologies Tower, its distinctive architecture a landmark on the city's horizon. The Foundation Gala is next month, Emily eventually said. I've been working on my speech with Ms. Rodriguez. Her English teacher had become a trusted mentor, helping Emily develop her natural communication skills. Any hints about the theme? Rich asked. Transformation, Emily replied. How moments of crisis can become catalysts for positive change. How sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the best outcomes if we choose to learn and grow from them. Rich smiled, recognizing their shared philosophy. Sounds perfect. I was thinking, Emily continued hesitantly, that maybe I could share more of our story. About how I ended up in your car that night. About how you chose to listen to a homeless kid instead of your business partner. People find it inspiring. It is inspiring, Rich affirmed. But only if you're comfortable sharing those parts of your past. They're your experiences to tell or keep private as you choose. Emily considered this. I think it's important to share them, not for attention, but because it might help other kids in tough situations know that their lives can change too, that their voices matter, even when adults might not want to listen. Rich felt a surge of pride at her wisdom and generosity of spirit. Then by all means, tell our story. It's one worth sharing. As the evening grew cooler, they moved inside, to the living room, where photographs chronicled their journey together. Emily's adoption day, her first day at Seattle Prep, holidays, birthdays, and countless ordinary moments that had become the treasured fabric of their shared life. Rich paused before a particular photograph, the one Jake had given them on adoption day, showing them laughing together at the company picnic. We should update this for the foundation lobby, he suggested. Show the before and after of our journey. Emily studied the photo thoughtfully. It's amazing how life can change so completely in an instant. If the cleaning lady hadn't left your car unlocked that day, if I hadn't overheard that conversation, if you hadn't believed me. But all those things did happen, Rich reminded her. By chance, by fate, or by some family connection we can't fully explain. And I'm grateful every day that they did. Emily hugged him suddenly, fiercely. Me too, Dad. More than anything. As Horizon Technologies continued to thrive and the Wilson Daniels Foundation expanded its reach, Rich found himself reflecting often on the irony of his journey. Michael and Sarah had plotted to steal his company, viewing him as an obedient puppy and sentimental fool whose trust made him vulnerable. In the end, it was precisely that capacity for trust, his willingness to believe a child when logic suggested skepticism, that had saved everything he valued and given him something infinitely more precious. His weakness had proven to be his greatest strength. The betrayal that might have destroyed him had instead created the opportunity for redemption, renewal, and the family he hadn't known he was missing. Emily, once a vulnerable child seeking shelter in a stranger's car, had become not only his daughter but his partner in creating a legacy far more meaningful than corporate success alone could ever be. Together, they had transformed a story of betrayal into one of redemption. A corporate crisis into a catalyst for community change, their chance encounter into a family bond that transcended biology, formed instead through mutual protection, unconditional trust, and enduring commitment to each other's well-being. As Rich helped Emily prepare for bed, a routine that had evolved but never disappeared as she grew older, she paused at her bedroom door. "Dad, do you ever wonder what your life would be like if I hadn't hidden in your car that day?" Rich considered the question seriously. "I'd have lost Horizon, certainly, but more importantly, I'd have continued living a successful but ultimately empty life, all achievement and no connection. I'd have missed out on you, on being a father, on discovering what truly matters." He smiled at his remarkable daughter. "So no, I don't wonder about that alternative life. I'm too grateful for the one we've built together." Emily nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Me too. Good night, Dad." "Good night, sweetheart. Dream big." So, Rich moved through their home, turning off lights and checking locks. The routine of a father rather than a corporate titan. He felt a profound sense of contentment. The company he had nearly lost had prospered beyond his original vision. The foundation he and Emily had created was changing hundreds of young lives. And most importantly, the family they had formed against all odds had become his greatest joy and proudest achievement. Michael and Sarah had attempted to steal a thriving business, but in their failure, they had inadvertently given Rich the greatest gift of his entire life. The true revenge wasn't in their legal consequences, but in the beautiful reality that had emerged from their betrayal. A testament to the transformative power of trust, compassion, and the family bonds that transcend traditional definitions. In the end, it wasn't the corporate empire that defined Rich's legacy, but the remarkable young woman who had appeared in his back seat one rainy Seattle